Title 42 has now expired. If people don't already know, this was a law on the books that was enforced during the previous administration, and this current administration had decided to no longer enforce it, so it had recently expired. Now, I want to go back in time about a week or two, depending on when this video comes out, but amidst the Title 42 expiration, there were some attacks in Texas within the span of 24 to 48 hours, where we had people committing attacks in local malls, on the street with vehicles, and the media claimed that these were white supremacists, making the alleged claim that these people were ultimately of Caucasian descent, and they were viewing the world in such a way where they're committing atrocities because they believe they're in a superior position through their race. And so naturally, the average person who looks at the media and says, oh, these are white supremacists, they're thinking of a certain image in their head, but the real perpetrators of these crimes that were in the span of 24 to 48 hours, these were actually Hispanic people. And they actually had markings on themselves. Not that usually if you have markings on yourself, the media was reporting that they were previous criminals, but if you look at their criminal background, they have a limited criminal background. The markings on their bodies are actually similar or akin to people of Mexican cartels. And I personally have sources who are theorizing that there are multiple layers to the situation. It's not a coincidence that these attacks happen in succession in a short period of time. By the way, these attacks happen in predominantly Hispanic areas by Hispanic perpetrators. Now, this is a race thing. I'm bringing this up because there's a reason why these perpetrators went to these areas to commit those criminal activities. Of course, these are tragic events, right? We want to secure our cities in a more profound way to where if there are criminals coming about, we have easy use and easy access to stop the crime right there, right then, and lives can be saved that way. But we have some theories from my sources that the cartel, there's actually two cartels that typically were opposed from each other. These are Mexican cartels. They had decided to work together for the purpose of pushing out certain people, certain criminals, into Texas, into the United States of America. They know that Title 42 is expiring. They know that this is going to create the incentive for a flood of people, not just Mexican immigrants, but you have people traveling not only from all over the world, like in China. They literally come from China, and they go all through Central America to the border. But we have people from Haiti and a whole wide array of different folks. The cartels want to control that border. They want to be able to traffic people with coyotes and mules, not the animals. This is their labels for the people who traffic people into the border. They want to traffic people. They want to traffic chemically altering substances. They want to be the deciding factor of control at that border. There's a lot of money involved there, and so that's what a cartel is, when you pretty much own the market share for a certain niche. Now, these cartels, they typically don't work with each other. They're on opposing sides. They're opposing forces. They decided to work together to instigate and provoke activity, criminal activity, to implicitly scare people who are also Hispanic, to tell them basically, we are in control here. We know that Title 42 is expiring, and this current administration, the United States administration, is going to let people in, but we have the utmost control here. Don't forget that. We are the ones who bring people in. We are the ones who bring substances in, and we are still going to be the controlling factor here. So they were making an implicit agreement with overt action, but it's all covert, through overt action, to instill to the people, hey, we're still here. Just because the United States government has decided to let people in willy-nilly, that doesn't mean that they have control and that you can just walk on through. We are still going to be here controlling who goes in, who goes out, really who goes in, and what goes in. So there's that aspect of it. The second aspect is different sources theorizing, again, that, and there's circumstantial evidence for it. That's why I'm saying theorize, because there's some evidence, but of course, even if something is legitimate, there are interests behind the scenes who are going to hide that evidence because they don't want that evidence to see the light. They don't want people to be aware of it, even if it's a minority of the population who's actually digging for this evidence. So this source is now saying, in tandem with the cartels working with each other, which is unheard of, and they're committing atrocities on U.S. soil, we have the current administration working or / communicating with these cartels to give them the go-ahead of do what you need to do. We will let it happen. Of course, they're going to have to come in, the United States government, and clean up the mess, but they're kind of turning a blind eye to that. They're looking away. They're letting whatever needs to be instigated be instigated. And that way the current administration can come in knowing that Title 42 is ending by their enforcement or their lack of enforcement. And then they say, hey, look, see, there's crimes being committed on U.S. soil. We're going to work with the media apparatus to say that these are white supremacists, whatever the main narrative is. And because they're using certain weaponry, we need to go after that weaponry. So that means we need to be tighter on gun control. Now, if anyone knows anything about the Second Amendment, it was designed not for hunting, not for self-defense, although those are secondary and tertiary actions. The primary action is to defend against tyrannical governments. Most of the time, now people do inflict damage on each other, so that's why it's necessary to use the Second Amendment for self-defense purposes. But throughout history, the number one perpetrator of individuals, not just from an individual right point of view, but from a actual liberty point of view, or false imprisonment or unjust death, is tyrannical measurements oppressing the people. So when you have the Second Amendment, you can uphold all your other rights, and you can have a deterrent for the government to go through due process to ensure that there's not a catastrophe upon individuals at mass scale, if it even comes down to a mass scale. And the Founding Fathers understood this because they were looking at King George at the time from England, and they were seeing the oppression. And the colonists were okay with taxes. They just wanted to represent themselves to approve certain taxes. But when the English government came in and they said, we are not going to give you representation, you're a colony of us, and so we have power over you, we're just going to come in and enforce our policies, that was not okay with the colonists. Then you had other things like quartering of soldiers, and there were massacres, there were crimes committed against colonists. So they understood that from a fundamental point of view. If you look at any type of genocide or famine or Joseph Stalin, Pol Pot in Cambodia, if you look at these dictators, if the people had a deterrent, certain criminal action, including people dying, people perishing at the whims of not having access to food or being overruled by a police state, these could have all been prevented. So the Second Amendment is there for that. Now, the government generally, not just the U.S. government, but any kind of centralized authority, they want to come in and they want to ensure that they have control over the people. So they have to disarm the population because that allows the U.S. government or any government to bypass due process, like we saw within the past 3-4 years in England and Australia. They don't have the right to bear arms. So the police, and you can look this up, you don't have to trust my word on it, the police broke into people's homes because they broke a policy or law that was, for most of our American standard, it would be an unconstitutional law, an unjust law. It makes zero logical sense. But it makes logical sense if you're part of that centralized authority because you want control over the people to control labor and resources. They broke into people's homes, they drug them off, and they said, we are going to detain you indefinitely. So not only are they not getting a fair trial, and a speedy one at that, but there's a whole host of rights that are being infringed on. The Fourth Amendment, a right to a fair and speedy trial. Fourth Amendment is unlawful search and seizure. So they're breaking into their home. They're committing all these unlawful, unconstitutional acts, right? How we would perceive it in America. And America is using British common law as a prerequisite to create our American law. So it's a weird type of situation there. So when the government comes in and they, let's say, theoretically allow these attacks to occur, or maybe an attack occurs and they're just leveraging the event for their own interests, and they want to disarm the people, and they know they can emotionally fearmonger the people and manipulate the people in that action, that allows them to gain control. And the more control the centralized authority figures have, the less power you have. See, the more leverage they have, the less leverage you have. The whole reason why we have individual rights, the freedom of speech, assembly, petition your government, religion, all that, plus the whole host of all the other rights in the Bill of Rights, is so that we have leverage over the federal government. If we go back in time to the foundation of the United States of America, we had Federalists and Anti-Federalists. The whole conundrum at the time was the Federalists wanted a strong centralized government because that's how you actually enact change and build a nation. Anti-Federalists are saying, we don't want to give the central government too much power because then it's going to be very similar to England at the time, which we're trying to get away from. So they compromise on the Bill of Rights. So now we, the people, have power, and we can go against the federal government, and there's a checks and balance system there, somewhat. Ever since the creation of that, the birth of that, there have been people who have been coming into government, or people who have been coming into different institutions, financial institutions, whatever the institution is, and chipping away at those Bill of Rights, because the more you chip away at it, the more power you gain from a centralized figure. So that's what the current administration has theoretically been doing, not just with this event, but with a lot of other events. They're coming in using the event, the incident, to say, here's the problem, look at what all these people are doing, even though they might have let these people commit the action themselves. We have so many intelligence agencies that are extremely bureaucratic, and there's so many employees working there, and we're supposed to have the best intelligence out there out of any other nation in the world. And to say that we have not seen these events coming it would be a lie, because after the fact, we can go through these documents, whether it's the NSA documents or CIA documents or FBI and NSA, those would be domestic, although the NSA does do foreign intelligence as well. But they would see, we have a paper trail of events even from 10, 20 years ago, where we saw everything happening up to a major event, like a year prior. And these intelligence agencies didn't do anything about it because they got orders from higher ups, and the orders were to not do anything. So they definitely are intelligent enough from a technical point of view to gather data to understand what's going to happen in X, Y, and Z future. Sometimes it's not exactly pinpointed, but they have a generality about it. So in tandem with disarming people and having more control over the people, this administration can also say, because they acknowledge that the general public is not aware of Title 42, they're not aware of what's happening at the border, right? But people generally, and the media is not reporting on it as well. So whether it's left-wing media or right-wing media, if it's cable, legacy media, they're barely reporting on it. I mean, it's very minuscule. It's part of the news cycle is to distract people from the real issues, and they're doing a very good job at that. And not only the media, but the federal government, they understand that people are not looking into the granular aspects of what's happening in our nation. So when you have events like this, the government can come in and they can say, we are going to disarm the people because of X, Y, and Z. Here are the events. Let's create an emotional reaction. Let's leverage these events to our ideological goals. And then the federal government can expand that to other events and expand that to other rights that we have. And over time, everything is degraded. Now, I will say that what's happening at the border is an atrocity in a sense that it's not that we shouldn't let people in. They just need to go through the process. This country is a country full of immigrants. So our priority is protecting the immigrants who have come here lawfully versus the immigrants who are coming here unlawfully. We also need to vet people. If we don't vet people, we're going to have not only unproductive members of society, but members of society who don't contribute to our system, whether it's something as simple as paying taxes, and they may actually commit acts of violence or infringe on people's rights, which we're seeing on the cities of the border in Texas. So a lot of important information here. I haven't seen the two things I talked about, which were the cartels potentially working with each other to commit widespread attacks, along the cities of Texas, to implicitly tell people akin to the race, hey, we are still in control of the border, regardless of Title 42 expiring, in tandem with the current administration using this as a reason to leverage gun control and potentially working with the cartels. I haven't seen that anywhere. I've had to go to different sources to acquire that information. And again, let's just say these are potential perspectives, okay? I'm not going to sit here and say these are cemented ideologies or cemented ideals or cemented events, cemented concepts that are actually occurring, right? A lot of this, it's very hard to find the information. It's very hard to gather all the necessary circumstantial evidence that you would need to actually convict someone or convict a group or whatever. But even if we pursue that, it's a lot of money, it's a lot of energy, it's a lot of time. It's a lot of political actions involved as well. It's not as simple as this person, there's overwhelming evidence against this person or this group, therefore they're guilty. There's a lot of politics involved. Politics is involved in everything that we do. I'll give a very niche example. Let's say there's a bodybuilding show. I don't know how many people who are watching this understand bodybuilding, but there are shows for bodybuilding. And for the most part, you may be watching a show where all these guys, let's say there's 10 guys on stage, they all look incredible, okay? We can say that they have body dysmorphia and they're taking it to the extremes, but let's just judge it from this point of view aside from that. Let's say they all look relatively similar. Now, maybe we can count out, okay, out of the 10 people, these 4 people, these are the top 4. Beyond that, you can't really tell who looks better or who doesn't, right? You're trying to find the differences and like striations of their quad muscles and the like you're looking for all these little details. It really comes down to politics. Oftentimes, the people who have more status, or they're like a fitness influencer, they will actually get the higher staging in that competition. So even politics applies in that sense, right? Politics isn't just what's happening with the federal government and all these different types of situations. Politics is involved in every little thing that we do. Politics is just interest, motives, incentives. It's an entangled web. And how we untangle the web and how we actually trace, one web through this convoluted mess back to an original source, or how it translates to something else, that's what we're doing here. That's what we're analyzing. And I try to break things down in a simplistic manner so that the general public can understand it, even though the general public isn't watching this. Whoever's watching this is going to be in the minority of the population. But it's important to understand what's happening in your country. And even if you're from another country, you're not specifically from the United States of America, just know that America sets the standard for all the other nations. If America loses its freedom, what's going to happen to all the other nations? All the other nations are going to start to degrade as well. People don't realize it, but it takes time, it takes decades to lose freedom. But if you look back, when you're 60 years old and you look back to when you're 20, you will notice how prices have increased thanks to inflation. You will notice how you have less rights than before if you compare 1-to-1. You will notice how the cultural aspect of your nation has changed just within the past 40 years when you're looking back from 60 to 20. And so these are important revelations to understand so that we can actually change these nations, change our ideologies in the world for the better, instead of dealing with the worst that humanity has to offer.